He has been the most celebrated economist and the top boss at Mint Street. He's of course quoted his share of controversy, but as Raghuram Rajan gets ready to wrap up his tenure as India's 23rd RBI governor, it's a phenomenal legacy that he leaves behind. We're not just going to talk to him about the policy that he's announced, but of course the exemplary act that his successor will have to match up to. Thank you very much, Governor, for being with us. I must first set the record straight that in the last 3 years, I think you've been the most straight-talking central banker. You've chosen to call a spade, and so I will urge you over the next 30 minutes that you will choose to talk candidly and call a spade indeed. Let's first begin with the policy that you announced yesterday, and you have red flagged a few issues while keeping interest rates completely unchanged. Do you believe rising prices at one level, and you've spent a fair amount of time on policy there, has reduced the elbow room for a rate cut significantly, or definitely more than what there was a little while back?
No, I think in our April policy, we flagged the possibility that risks were to the upside. I think since then we've seen the evolution of the monsoon, which has been fairly good. But I would say that still risks are to the upside. The RBI will have to watch vigilantly for any signs that prices are not coming down. Vegetable prices and pulse prices were high in the last reading.
Sure.
And we have to watch that. There's a hope that they will come down, especially given the substantial planting in pulses. And more generally, that this will reduce some of the inflationary expectations that have been built up. In India, expectations build up on salient factors like food, like milk, and so on. So my sense is this, there are some factors which could bring down price pressures. We have to watch the evolution. And we also have to watch two specific things. One is the pay commission, the rollout of allowances as and when that is announced. That will have some impact, some of it mechanical, some of it more than mechanical. So we have to watch that. And the second is GST. Again, there is no presumption that it should be inflationary. And even if it is, it could be a short-term phenomenon because there's a price adjustment, one-time price adjustment.
The reason I ask you the price question, sir, is that the obvious bit is, has price rise taken you by surprise? Because your policy very categorically also says that the upside risk to inflation is excluding food and fuel is very uncertain. Are we once again in this unknown territory where we do not know what will happen with prices?
No, I think if you look at excluding food and fuel, it has stabilized. Now, stabilization on the one hand is a good thing because it is at around 5%. That's a low level relative to the past. But we do need it to go down a little more over time if we are to get to the center of our inflation sort of band. I think that's an issue that the RBI will have to grapple with going forward. But I'm hopeful that if inflationary expectations come down further based on a good monsoon, remember we've had two very bad monsoons, and despite that we've had the disinflation we've had. That speaks for the astute food management, but also speaks for the fact that somehow we've contained the food effect from spreading to the others, and I think that is part of the monetary management that has been helpful. So expectations have been relatively contained given how much food prices have increased.
At one level, are we hinging too much hope on benign monsoon and that taking care of high prices, not just at Mint Street, but even in North Block? Too much hope is being placed on the monsoon.
No, I think
it's been good so far, yes.
I think if you look at the sort of aberrant areas of price pressure, they are certainly to do with food most recently. In the past, services was also very important, but service inflation has come down. And that I think you can attribute to a change in expectations, some effect of lower inflation, feeding into those expectations. So I would think that I don't think we're being overly optimistic that the monsoon should curb some of these aspects, especially given the good sowing in pulses. If that continues,
that's right.
I think that will curb some of that inflation.
You did say you have 28 more days and each one of that day will be fully utilized. You have 27 beginning today. At this stage, I want to step back.
Minus half an hour for this.
Minus half an hour for this. I want to just step back and take a look at the lasting legacy that you've created. And I'm going to go step by step on each point. Let us begin with the Monetary Policy Committee. Many people believe this is a seminal change as far as India's monetary management is concerned. It does replace the governor with a committee that perhaps could be less influenced, On a lighter note, you have very little left for your successor to do. Is this a seminal change that it's being made out to be?
I do think it's a seminal change. I do think the government has been fully supportive of this process. It couldn't have happened without the government pushing through the necessary legislation and sticking to the inflation bands that it had agreed with us last year, but also moving forward on creating the committee in a way that allows a smooth transition from an RBI governor determined policy to a committed determined policy. If the governor has enough credibility within the RBI, he can still drive policy. It's not that the governor, I use the word he or she, it's not clear that the governor has abandoned all power. They still have that power, but it's a little more diffused. And I think that's an important transition, because ultimately we want multiple minds to have inputs not just into the decision, which they already have, but into the responsibility for the decision, which they don't have right now.
Does it also reduce the pressure on one man alone?
Absolutely. It reduces the pressure, but I think there are other benefits also. I mean, this need not be overt pressure, it's also mental pressure. I mean, I'm determining in some sense, some part of the economic fate of the country by the interest rate determination. If I were to cut by 100 basis points or raise by 100 basis points, it would change overnight what happens. So that's an enormous responsibility. But also, I would say that it allows for continuity.
So have you left your successor to do a little less, or have you absolved him of the pressure that you felt through in the last 3 years?
I don't know. I do think this is a more sensible way of proceeding.
Right.
I think that in the longer run, I mean, first we are a full service central bank. There are so many things we do.
That's right.
And you said, will they have enough work? Well, other central bank governors do only monetary policy in a committee, and they're still fully occupied. So when we do supervision, regulation, deposit insurance, all that, and development, along with monetary
policy. So there'll always be enough and more on the platter of a central bank governor.
If you're interested, there's enough to do.
Is that the operative word, if you're interested? I'm going to move on to the other lasting legacy. I think you changed the paradigm as far as inflation management was concerned. You chose to first target inflation, you changed the metric to CPI. While doing all of that, I think the biggest endorsement has come from the government. You stand vindicated today that that band that you had recommended has been endorsed by the government. But there are critics out there, and I think it's only fair that we talk about critics out there who believe that inflation targeting has passed its state. Most developed central banks don't do it now because it restricts the role of the central bank to just price stability. It needs to be a little more. How will you counter that? You stand vindicated, yes, but how are you going to counter that?
Look, I have never been an inflation nutter in the sense that what we have moved towards is medium-term inflation forecast targeting. That's a very complicated phrase.
That's right.
But what that is saying is that we worry about inflation over the medium term, which means today if inflation pops up for some reason, say oil prices go to 150 today, we don't immediately sort of raise interest rates so high that we will get to the target tomorrow. We do it over the medium term, which is why the glide path for bringing inflation down has been adjusting to the state of the economy, and we've said we'll do 6 in January 2016, 5 in March 2017, and then 4 down the line after that. In March 2018. The point, however, is that this is not a straitjacket. One. Second, I have always believed financial stability is an important function of the central bank, but financial stability becomes more of an issue when you are on the downside in danger of serious deflation, rather than when you're trying to curb inflation. That is why I was not overly insistent that we put in financial stability into our mandate. Instead, it comes in implicitly when we say we are also worried about growth, because if you have financial instability, you're going to kill growth. The point, however, is that we have taken into account the state-of-the-art discussion on inflation targeting. And we are fairly, in a sense, broad-minded, while keeping in mind the main focus should be on inflation, because that's the best way the central bank can support growth. To the accusations that other central banks have moved away, I asked them, name one. No central bank has actually moved away from inflation targeting, because once they've had that credibility, including Emerging markets like Malaysia,
Right.
Thailand, Indonesia, they have lower inflation than we do. Why do they have it? You have to ask, and my sense is they forget inflation targeting, they have an inflation focus,
That's right.
which is very, very important. They don't have this anything goes, and the moment there is any pressure on the economy because of interest rates, we say bring them down, bring them down, bring them down.
Is that an ill-informed debate, and are you, has that been the most frustrating part of your job? A very ill-informed debate on interest rates. There's a reason why I'm asking you that question. There is this clamor from Indian industry every time there's a policy and we do a poll. Should there be interest rate cuts? Everybody from industry says yes, there should be. But some of the tallest captains of Indian industry, you name Anand Mahindra, you name Kumar Mangalam Birla, have been on our channel on record to say that even if there were an interest rate cut in this regime, far more than it has been the 150 basis points that you did, it wouldn't have moved the clock on investments so much. So in some sense, do you believe the debate out there is very ill-informed, and has that been most frustrating?
I don't think frustration is the word I would use. I think there's been a process of trying to educate the public, which is why my speeches. The point is that you have to take people along with you. You are making a big move. You're making a move in which experts in the past have said, no, we cannot do this.
That's
India is special, India is different. And of course, to the public, one economist looks like the other. How do I know this guy's arguments make more sense than the other guy's arguments? So you have to try and persuade, you have to try and give evidence, you have to try and say this is the way to go for these reasons, not trust me, I know. And that's really been the process of education. I'm trying to tell people that look, industry is best served in a low inflation environment, because then interest rates can really come down without hurting the saver.
That's right.
Otherwise, what you do is you have negative real interest rates. Eventually, the saver rebels. The saver revolts and he goes to buy gold when you have a current account deficit problem and it blows up in your face. That's what happened in 2013. So we have to balance different. Monetary policy is like juggling 6 balls. It's not interest rate up, interest rate down. There's the exchange rate, there are long-term yields, there are short-term yields,
There are
there's
webs
credit
within
growth.
webs.
It's like 6 balls connected with strong elastics, and you're juggling them. So when you throw one up a little more, it pulls the other balls out of
Looking at your
sync.
track record in the last 3 years, you've managed to juggle them rather well. CAD is down to 1.1% last fiscal. The rupee has been remarkably stable. We can boast of good forex reserves. So there's plenty of green on your report card. But I must talk to you about the other bit. And I think this is the one legacy that most people in India would laud you for. I think I give you a big thumbs up there, because this needed gumption, this needed conviction. The war that you waged against NPAs, I'll first step back and ask you the basic question. You did see the cracks when you came in 2013. Could you not have waged this war 6 months before you did?
No, first, I came in 2012, so I saw it a little longer from the finance ministry. And the answer is the cracks were there, but we didn't have the tools. The banks didn't have the tools to fight it as much as they wanted. They needed the flexibility to restructure loans without it being called, forbearance and it going forward into the future. They needed the ability to excise promoters. They were trying to take out promoters, but because they didn't have the equity, the courts weren't supporting them. The courts were supporting people with the equity.
That's right.
So we needed to give them the ability to take equity, which needed work with the SEBI. Because SEBI rules didn't permit that under some circumstance. So there was work to be done to give them the tools. Once we had given them the tools and we were coming to the end of our forbearance,
That's right.
we decided to then take a look at all the balance sheets and see whether they were following our instructions as we mandated, or whether there was evergreening, etc. going on. So we worked with the banks, and we did this asset quality review, and we said, look, here are things where you're not quite obeying the principle of what we're trying to do. So then we pointed out places they needed to clean up and so on, and I think that is the process which is underway.
Could you have done this a little earlier? On
the
hindsight, because we always have the advantage of hindsight now.
No, look, see, the problem with forbearance is that it always looks like a good thing to do until it stops working.
That's right.
Let's not mess around. Maybe growth will lift all ships. and eventually these steel companies will start paying. Eventually these power companies will start paying. What if growth doesn't pick up?
And that is exactly what happened.
And that is what happened. And so I think as we saw that growth wasn't picking up, we had committed to forbearance early on in, I think in 2011 up till April 2015. And there was a lot of pressure continued beyond that. And we said, no, it ends now. And once forbearance ended, restructured were not called standard assets anymore. We could push the recognition more strongly.
What you did with NPAs did make a lot of enemies against you.
Maybe.
Will you agree with me?
I don't know. They don't come and tell me. One of the nice things about the RBI is I think people respect the RBI and don't come and lobby you all the time.
But many people out there do believe that the crony capitalists came after you, did they not?
Maybe. I don't know. Look, let me put it this way. I had an agenda of things that needed to be done. And I knew if I hold off on these things and continuously look for the future, it'll be very hard. It is important to build political consensus for these things, so we work with the government. I mean, the whole AQR exercise was initially advertised to the government, and then we worked with the government on rolling it out. So the political support for this has been built. But eventually, if you make enough enemies on many fronts, maybe they get angry. But I don't worry about that.
You don't worry about that, and people will obviously not dare come make presentations at the RBI, but you did feel the pressure from some sections of India Inc. That were uncomfortable with what you were doing with NPAs.
Not really, not directly. And I will say this both of the previous government and this government, I have never had any calls from anybody saying lay off, don't go after these people, don't constrain this form of licensing or give a license to thus and such. Absolutely nothing. And so to some extent
was that because you could turn around and say a no to them?
Well, I have said no on a number of occasions. Not on nobody asked me for personal deals.
Right.
It was on other issues. What we have tried to do at the central.
Was it easy saying no to the government?
Well, look, the government has entrusted you with a responsibility, which is to maintain the stability of the country, right? And in that responsibility, you have to sometimes say no, because it is against the long-term stability of the country, even if it fulfills some short-term aim. And it is precisely for that reason that the government has in the past selected men of integrity to be governors of the Reserve Bank. I'm not talking about present case, but the point is that I think there is a reason for that. And you are called upon to say no on occasion, because it may be in the short-term interest, but may affect the country in the long term. I'll give an example. There is this constant badgering by various departments in the government and some public sector entities for us to use our reserves to lend to them.
That's the debate I was going to come to.
Yes, and again and again we've said no, because
have you upset sections within the government with saying no on this?
I don't know, but I think there's a very clear reason why we should say no. The reserves are built so as to be able for us to be able to use them when in need. The entities they want us to support can go out there in the market and borrow in dollars. We don't prevent that. The only issue is they'll have to pay 4 or 5% interest rate, right? And they think they can come to us and say, you're lending to the US government or the UK government at 1.5%, why don't you lend to us at that rate?
Right.
Well, we lend to the US government at that rate, we hold US government securities precisely because they're of unimpeachable credit and can be liquidated at a moment's notice, which is what the country needs. If I lent to some entity which had illiquid
Or if that
bonds,
money were to be used for bank recapitalization, like it was being suggested a while back.
well, that I think some of the suggestions don't fully understand the constraints that
Precisely.
monetary policy imposes. In fact, we will try and make a document available which explains what the constraints are. This is actually technical constraint. It's not because I don't want to give the money.
Your predecessor was on record, Dr. Subbarao, and he said over his deathbed, should he ever relent to give reserves away to the government. So I think that debate is settled, and you've settled it for good.
No, so let me be very careful. The money we make is money that belongs to the people of India. It comes from the fact that we print currency and that banks are forced to deposit reserves in us. We don't pay any interest on that. So that is purely something we make because of our monetary function. It's something that belongs to the people of India. Whatever profits we make will have to, the first claim on those profits is the government as a representative of the people. We have given higher and higher surplus payments to the government. This year is going to be close to a record. And my sense is, if the board agrees tomorrow, we will pay significantly more, maybe 1/6 more than was promised in the budget. These are large payments. And so to somehow say that we are holding back any money from the government is not
And
right.
you're not holding that back for self-consumption as it's made out to be. But
RBI doesn't, RBI maintains
Precisely.
a fairly reasonable tight ship.
So I must turn to the other focus, and I think this required some amount of conviction within the RBI. You did have another paradigm change, which was liquidity deficit. You wanted to, and you are on course to bring it down to zero, even to surplus actually. This was against the ethos of the RBI. The RBI always believed in having a liquidity deficit. Was it a difficult decision for people to convince within the RBI on this?
No, this was one of those areas where actually analysis and technical thinking was needed. The liquidity deficit was needed when we didn't use money market instruments the way we started using post the Urjit Patel committee report.
Right.
So, in a period when we had two windows, one where we gave out money, one where we absorbed money, in order to set the policy rate at the rate where we gave out money, right, we had to run it in deficit. Otherwise, it would move to the surplus window,
That's right.
which would be a 100 basis point lower rate. So, that was why the system was running in deficit. But post the Urjit Patel committee report, there has been a significant change in the way we do money market operations. We now can absorb money at this rate also through money market operations. Once we could absorb money at this rate, we didn't have to hold the system in deficit, in a structural deficit. We could move to structural neutrality, and whenever there's excess money in the market, we absorb it at that rate. When there's deficit money, we give it at that rate. So that money market, the money market operations we have brought in has enabled us to move to this new system. It required thinking. It also required
convincing as well within the RBI, did it not?
I think we have fairly strong discussions, but yes, one of the things that convinced us was actually the fact that last year money market rates started going up, including treasury rates, in fact early part of this year. And that worried us. Why is this going up when we're maintaining plentiful liquidity? Which is why we decided that it was important to move towards a structural neutrality than structural
And
deficit.
banks can't thank you enough for it. In fact, they haven't done their own bit, and we'll come to that in just a bit from now. I want to talk about the rupee because it's often quoted and said that rupee listens to Rajan. I wonder who they'll listen to once you go. But do you believe the rupee is fairly valued, or are you someone who, like a lot of people out there, does believe it's overvalued and these corrections that happen every now and then are warranted? And would your answer be significantly different if you were talking on the 7th of September and not in August?
No. First, let me say two things. One, I think the rupee currently is fairly valued. I mean, it moves up and down a little bit with the other currencies, but over time, I don't think it's moved significantly relative to the other currencies. And we've seen in the last couple of months exports in a variety of industries pick up more strongly, which convinces me the key element in our export structure is not so much the rupee
That's right.
as the growth in partner countries. And we're seeing it across the board in a variety. I mean, think of one of our most competitive exports, which is auto products or cars as well as ancillaries. That's a very competitive industry. If we were overvalued, we would find we can't make any headway there. But we are able to export significant amounts. So I think that the rupee is often used as a scapegoat for other issues related to productivity and so on. Now, there's a second question. Let us say you were convinced that the rupee was strongly overvalued, and most of these calculations don't take into account the fact that India's productivity is also growing.
That's right, yes.
Which should be a way you adjust the real effective exchange rate. However, let's say you were convinced. What would you want us to do differently from what we're already doing? We are absorbing a fair amount of the inflows that we think are likely to be volatile. Our reserves at the highest level ever, 365 billion and counting. So if we were to absorb a significantly larger amount in terms of foreign exchange inflows, then what we would have to do is we'd have much less room to absorb government debt. Interest rates would go up. Is that a trade-off that you're comfortable with? The guys who are asking us these questions don't ever give you a sense of how you would engineer this fall in the rupee. The way the Chinese engineered this fall was asking the banks to hold enormous amounts of claims on the central banks. In the central banks. Now, is our banking system ready for that? Is our public ready to absorb a huge amount of government securities as we mount our reserves significantly? So the guys who are talking about, they think you press a button and that determines the exchange rate tomorrow.
But they also think you press a button and interest rates can come down. So I think it's best
to
don't
listen to them.
Maybe. But I must ask you another question on the rupee, and this is a counter argument. In 1991, when the devaluation happened, rupee was looked at as a sign of pride.
Yeah.
Do you believe there's finally realization in there that rupee is actually not a sign of pride, it's a mere price? Because every now and then there are politicians out there who say that the rupee should actually be 40 to a dollar and not 68 as it is now.
Yeah, I don't think that is that prevalent. I think people understand that an excessively strong rupee does affect our ability to compete, and an excessively weak rupee does create inflationary pressures and does create volatility. I have throughout insisted it's not so much the level that we should be worried about, but broad stability. That even if it depreciates so as to account for the inflation differentials, we shouldn't be too worried.
It should be the crests and the troughs. It should be a straight line.
There should be a steady movement whichever way, and to the extent that we can bring down inflation, there need not be even a steady depreciation.
If I were to ask you to do some crystal ball gazing on your other lasting legacy, and that's the banking landscape. You know, you've introduced niche banks, payment banks. You're no longer having a restricted window. There's going to be on-tap banking. Having unleashed all of these measures, and let us suppose that things work out as you envisage it to. If I were to ask you, let's fast forward 2 years from now, what would the Indian banking landscape really look like?
I think it would be a mixed system. Mixed in terms of institutions, a variety of institutions catering to different demands. It would also be mixed in terms of ownership. You would have private sector banks, public sector banks. It would also be mixed in terms of size. You would have small banks relating to the small communities, small businesses, and you would have large banks dealing with our international businesses as well as huge projects. And also you would have banks and non-bank financial institutions competing with each other, with each one taking their specific expertise. So, 10 years ago, it was the banks doing pretty much everything.
That's right.
Over time, we hope we have a more diversified system, which will also therefore be a more resilient system, because not everybody will go after the same areas, and therefore the system will not suffer the same kinds of risks all the time.
What are the risks that still exist? Because some people out there say that marshalling technology has been a big forte that the RBI has championed in getting new banking licenses and getting new players in the banking space, but is that too ahead of its time?
No. So clearly there are cyber risks. Clearly some of our legacy institutions aren't fully prepared, even in terms of just being operationally tight. I mean, if you remember the Bangladesh bank problem, apparently they had written the password.
That's right, yes.
And taped it onto the machine, so that anybody who was there could actually access the Swift accounts. So there is a certain laxity in culture, in cyber culture, not just in Bangladesh, but I would think pretty much everywhere. And we need to attune people to the fact that the world is very different. Your cyber criminals are looking for every opportunity to get in and to make large
and criminals of the world are getting smarter by the day, they say, and I think that's something that we
they're smarter, they're more cyber savvy, which is why we've started a cyber subsidiary. And the intent is to be able to attract these young kids who are state of the art and who can actually ethically hack into systems and expose some of the weaknesses in our cyber systems.
I do want to switch gears at this stage, and I know you've spoken on this, but I think I want to set the record straight for one final time. When the whole vicious personal attack, and I call it vicious and personal, and I'm choosing my words very carefully here, was happening against you from Subramanian Swamy, whose views I don't endorse, and I think it's deranged to a certain extent, did you feel isolated?
Let me put it this way, that I think there was an enormous amount of support from the public, and I don't think there has been a situation where I felt that allegations that some of these critics have made were actually believed by anyone other than their firm supporters. So in that sense, I don't feel isolated. There has been an outpouring of warmth, and that's, for me, that's what counts.
I'll tell you why I asked you that question. If it was a criticism against your policy or what you did at the RBI, I don't think there would have been this kind of support that would have poured in. But he got personal. He got rather scathing. He downright got personal there. And which is why I'm asking you, because of the lack of support from the highest men in the government, do you believe it was an attack against the institution? Nobody in New Delhi really stood up against it.
No. So
because it wasn't just about you; it was about the institution that you represented.
No, I think that when it came to the institution, and when it came to some of the processes that were followed in the institution, I think we had one of the cleanest processes for giving out licenses.
That's right.
And there were some allegations made about that, totally unfounded. To my mind, when somebody is making allegations against the institution, they are damaging the institutional structure of the economy, which is I think a problem.
Were you let down that the government didn't come out and support as much as they should have?
I don't dwell on that.
Would an intervention at the highest level of the government have averted a Brexit?
No. Look, I've said again and again, these allegations weren't at all a factor in my thinking. Criticism comes with the territory. Some criticism, as you said, goes beyond what is reasonable. I think criticism of policies is perfectly fine. Allegations, ad hominem allegations, which impute motives or corruption, etc.,
right, yes,
without any basis, essentially vitiate the atmosphere in this country. And without a good atmosphere, you cannot get economic progress. If everybody is suspicious of every national institution and saying they're not doing their duty, I think we cannot move ahead.
So are you saying that relentless Sikh campaign had no role to play in your decision to return to academia as soon as you are?
No, look, you started off by asking, are you worried about the enemies you have made, etc. Look, the entire set of actions that I've taken have been with the idea of what is it, in my view, and I admit my views may be flawed, what is most important for the country going forward. And of course, in that process, you say no to a lot of people, some of whom may be very influential. And so there are plenty of enemies you make. It goes with the territory in this job. This job, I see it as you have to be reform-minded and therefore willing to take risks on reforms. But you should not be willing to take risks with the stability of the financial system or of the country. So, conservative on stability, broad-minded and open-minded on reform.
One of your quotable quotes also is that sometimes risk management is not taking any risk at all when it comes to very sensitive issues like that. But because we are talking candidly and because it's time to set the record straight, I know the RBI and the government have very different mandates, I mean, largely, plain speaking, there is a different mandate. Is it possible then, I mean, and it is a possibility that you will differ and you will disagree on many issues, but what has your relationship with the government of the day been like?
Absolutely cordial with the people I interact, which is the finance minister and the prime minister, as well as government officials in the finance ministry. There have been episodes of friction. I think those had to do with personalities who have moved on. But I think I would say the relationship between the government and the finance ministry and the RBI are perfectly strong, which is why you see a lot of cohesion on this inflation framework. Sometimes people say I'm apolitical or politically naive. What we have done could not have been done without strong cooperation between the RBI and the government, and which requires an exercise in persuasion. You asked me to be candid. I'm perfectly happy to be candid, but I will not talk. I have never talked about the private conversations that the RBI constantly has with the government.
How would you compare your relationship with the previous establishment versus this?
I think similar.
Particularly Manmohan Singh and P. Chidambaram.
I think, look, let me put it this way. From neither the past administration nor the current administration have I ever received a directive to do, favor this party, go slow on this thing that you're doing. Nothing of that sort. And this is interesting because the thinking in this country often is, this is also political, it's all, crony capitalism, etc., etc. But I have to say I've never been asked, give a license to thus and such, do this, do that.
Do you believe there was a trust deficit to begin with because you were a UPA appointee?
I don't know. You have to ask. I have to ask people who can answer that. What I can say is that the interaction, again, with the economic policy makers in the government has been of great cordiality and understanding.
There are critics out there, and I definitely am not one of them because I think you did the right thing, but there are critics out there who say that you crossed the Lakshman Rekha when it came to speaking on issues that were outside the realm of the monetary policy. I have two questions there. How would you counter that charge? And B, if you have to make those speeches all over again given the same context, would you do it?
First, I think nobody who makes, let me say, 95% of people who make those allegations haven't actually read the speech.
Or heard them.
They've read the reports of the speech and reports of the reports of the speech. So now it becomes, Rajan, a constant critic of the government. Read those speeches. You will not find a word of, I'm not saying that it is unfair to criticize the government, but I do not believe it is my job as the central bank governor to criticize the government. What I have said on occasion on policy is, here is the way to go for the macro stability of the country. Let me give you an example, which is this famous Make in India, Make for India controversy, which is a non-controversy.
Would you make that speech all over again?
The intolerance speech was about how tolerance was extremely important for the growth of the country because we needed a dialogue in order to get economic growth. Because once we reached the frontiers, we needed to have an intellectual dialogue.
Can I ask you? Yes.
Let me just finish. I spoke with the finance minister a week after that speech. And he said, this is exactly what I've been saying.
He said that to us in an interview as well after you made that speech.
So the point here is that it was portrayed as a criticism. The government is not mentioned in that speech. It was a plea for tolerance in the country. Tell me which government will be against tolerance?
Dr. Rajan, there's a reason why I'm asking you that question. And the reason is that why should you be apologetic about making a speech on an issue which concerns a lot of people. Why should you, apologetic in the sense, why should you justify it through the realm of economic policy, through the realm of macro stability?
No, there is, I want to be careful about this. You have a platform. People listen to you. People listen to you often not because you're wise, etc., but because you may say something about interest rates. So it is important the central bank governor not misuse that platform to talk about, let's say, films or dance or their views on culture, and that is not what you. I do think the public platform should be used to further the interests of the institution in safeguarding the stability of the country and to promoting growth, which means you can opine on economic issues, but there has to be an economic link, right? So I think it's important to have that link, which is why I'm trying to justify the economic link in these speeches. But I think it's also important to see that if I have a criticism for the government, and I have, suggested certain alternative courses of action to the government,
right,
it's always been private, never from a public platform.
So as we wrap this, you're 53 years young or old, whichever way you want to look at it. You've got many active years of an economist and a public servant left in you. Will you return to India in this or any other capacity to serve in public service?
Well, I've said in that letter I wrote to my staff members that I'd be happy to serve the country. Public service, private service, I think it's all related. I think we are working towards a stronger, a richer, a more equal India in the future. And I think there are many ways of doing this. I think my initial effort really is going to be on the research side. Let's think a little more about bringing more research into our policy discussions. Certainly I'm getting back into research at Chicago, and I think I will work with some of our existing institutions to see how we can further it. We do a 1 week sort of course for aspiring PhD students. We did one last year. Hope to continue that this year.
I know you've said you like to live in the realm of ideas and research is going to be your forte, but is it easy to go back to being from such a celebrated governor whose every word has been hung on to being a professor with his head stuck in research?
See, the trappings of governorship are not what really sort of excite me. It's the discussions in the conference room here where we have all the ADAs, DGs, and we're trying to formulate a policy for small finance banks, and we're saying this works, and somebody comes up with their experience and says, no, it doesn't quite work, let's move it this way. I mean, those have been the exciting times, and at the end of it you feel that you've actually crafted something which may be a step forward. People saluting you and badgering you for selfies. It's nice that people think that way, but that's not what's important.
You really have been a newshound's best delight. From a governor's look to an Amul ad on his tenure, this was unprecedented of sorts. Did that amuse you, or did that make you wonder what's really happening around me?
Well, let me say it wasn't that useful either, in the following sense that on the one hand you had a position from which you could make policies and so on. On the other hand, your every word is scrutinized, including the 40th minute of a podcast with the IMF. So you have to be on your guard all the time. Whether press is present or it's not present, it leaks out some way, this way, that way. Number of discussions with students have, so it puts you're always in the limelight. That's a problem, especially if people think that.
Are you going to miss that?
No, absolutely
I
not.
have one final question to ask of you, and everybody at ET now wonders, how many ties does the governor own? You've got one maroon tie for every monetary policy, and when we try and segregate your answers from one to the other, they all actually end up looking the same. What's with that tie and monetary policy? Is that a lucky tie of sorts?
I think it was a tie I wore on my first day here.
You wore a bow tie on your first day.
Did
but
I?
Yes, I think your first monetary policy you did wear.
I think, anyway, it's one of those things where there's a little bit of sentimentality or superstition, whichever way you put it. It's something that maybe bring me luck. It's like my little rabbit's tail. So I wear that on important occasions.
Are you going to wear that on your day out?
I don't know. We'll see.
So for all the quotable quotes, I am Raghuram Rajan and I do what I do. Why don't you say it for the cameras one more time?
No, please.
But Governor Rajan, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you very much.
Thank
sir.
you.